This is regarding the principles of appraisal course, chapter number 2, accepting a request for an appraisal. So again, before valuing a, a property for a client, it's important for the appraiser to understand the reasons for the valuation and what the clients intend to do with that valuation. Now, there can be various reasons for valuing a given property. It could be because there is going to be a listing and a sale, a mortgage financing, capital gain tax, divorce, um, and that requires a settlement. So the appraiser needs to know what he or she is getting into. And as a salesperson, uh, we may not have the experience, education, or the insurance coverage to complete a valuation for anything other than that for the listing purpose. So asking a series of questions and acquiring certain information from a prospective client before agreeing to an appraisal assignment is important. So again, asking the question so that we can define the problem is a key here. So once the appraisal assignment has been agreed to, collect information on the subject's listing and selling history and zoning before would help us in understanding what the highest and best use of the property will be, and that will help us in figuring out the type of comparables that will be needed. So, so based on this, we will be talking about the various questions to be asked so that we can define the problem, so the information, so basically the information needed by the appraiser before she can agree to take on an appraisal assignment. We should also be able to outline what is included in an agreement and describe the preliminary work that is required. And also we will be talking about what factors determine the estimate of highest and best use of a property and what to look for in forecasting. Having said that, let's talk about um, the first contract. So when an appraiser or a salesperson is first contacted and asks to complete evaluation on a property, the appraiser salesperson need to be able to ask a number of questions in order to be able to understand what is that they are being asked to do. So in the appraisal industry, that is what is called as defining the problems. So once the appraiser has a good idea of what is being asked, they can decide whether they want to proceed with the valuation assignment or they want to, and how much they want to charge the client for it. So for an appraiser to define the problems, there are few set of questions like what is the identity of the property to be appraised, what are the property rights being appraised, what is the purpose of the appraisal, what type of value is required, what is the effective date of the appraisal, what assumptions and limiting conditions are needed for the appraisal assignment. So these are the 6 important questions that needs to be asked. So essentially, let's go over them one by one. What is the identity of the property to be appraised? Now, it is essential that a complete and accurate identification of the subject property be provided. Now, this identification can be achieved um, by obtaining not only the municipal address but the full legal address and full legal description of the property, because the municipal address alone is not sufficient, as a street may appear on appear a number of times in a town or a city. In addition, the legal description may not accurately identify the unique property or the unique location of the property. So but it also establishes, um, so the legal description not only accurately identifies the unique location of the property but also establishes the boundaries within which the property is located. So the second question is, what are the property rights being appraised? There are different types of interest in the land. The appraiser needs to find out what type of estate or interest they are being asked to value. Now there are states such as fee simple, future estate, freehold, leasehold state, and life states. These are, so again, they are interested in the land which can impact these states, such as an easement or a covenant. So let's talk about fee simple. Now, fee simple is the highest state or absolute right in a real property. Fee simple involves most right with the fewest limitation and is generally considered absolute ownership. However, this bundle of right, the right to use, sell, lease, enter, give away, or refrain from any of these rights in regards to property, is subject to various restrictions imposed by law of governing bodies. What is the purpose of an appraisal? Now, the purpose of appraisal refers to the use that will be made of the value estimate. Five major purposes or reasons are outlined: transfer of ownership, extension of credit, compensation for damages or loss, and there's also taxation and land use studies or feasibility studies. So, to recap, we need to there are a couple of questions that are required to be able to define the problem. Which these questions are: what is the identity of the property to be appraised? What are the property rights being appraised? What is the purpose of appraisal? And what type of value is required? So let's look at the question number three. What is the purpose of the appraisal? The purpose of the appraisal refers to the use that will be made of the value estimate. Five major purposes or reasons are outlined. Um, the purpose could be transfer of ownership. The purpose could be extension of credit. It could be compensation or for damage or loss. It could be taxation. It could be estimated land use studies or feasibility studies. It is essential that the purpose be established at the very beginning of the assignment and be clearly stated in the appraisal report. It will determine what type of value will be required for that appraisal assignment. An appraisal for an insurance claim will require insurance value. Land is not included, as opposed to the market value for transfer of ownership purpose. What type of value is required? As previously mentioned, there are many different types of values: market value, value in use, insurance value, lending value, assessment value. As a result, it is important to know what type of value is required. This will, of course, depend on the purpose of the appraisal and the intention of the client. It is important that the client understand what type of value is being used, and the best way of doing that is to define the value to the client so that there is no confusion or complication down the road. What is the effective date of the appraisal? Every estimate of value is valid only during specific market conditions. This applies whether it is a market value, insurable value, investment value, lending value, or any other specific value that is to be estimated. Value is a result of interaction of forces of market demand, supply and demand. When these conditions change, the value estimate based on them will also change. Therefore, every appraisal must be made as of specific date to identify the prevailing market forces and conditions in terms of which value is estimated. This is the effective date of appraisal, often referred to as the date on which the appraisal applies, or the as of date. What it comes when it comes to valuing a property for transfer of ownership or extension of credit, the effective date of the appraisal will be the same date as the date of inspection of the property. However, there are situations where the effective date would not be the same as the date of inspection of the property. The inspection date might be today, but the valuation needs to be of at some point in the past. So retroactive appraisals might include the following: valuation for capital gain tax, valuation for provision of a will, and selling end state. Here the effective date would be the date of the death. A value of expropriation, where the valuation date would be likely to be the date of taking or registration of the expropriation. A valuation to settle a fire insurance claim, where the effective date would be the fire date, or on the date when the fire occurred. A valuation for a marriage separation would be the effective date, where the effective date would be the date of separation. Valuation in the past. Of course, there are challenges when it comes to inspecting a property today for evaluations sometimes in the past. These questions that need to be asked are: what changes have occurred, and what did the property look like on the effective date? What forces and factors were at work at the time of the effective date? What sales or listings are available from the effective date? This would be more of a challenge for the further back the valuation date is. What assumptions and limiting conditions are needed for the appraisal assignment? Assumptions and limiting conditions are a series of qualifying statements and assumptions commonly associated with the appraisal report, in which the appraiser sets out the items that define, limit, and restrict the scope of appraisal and inform the client accordingly. Limiting conditions are usually grouped under assumptions and limiting conditions that may be included in the letter of transmittal, but more commonly at the end of the appraisal report. Limiting conditions generally relate to such issues as legal title, no warranty by appraisal concerning the title validity, the appraiser reliance on information furnished by the others is deemed to be correct, the improvements on the property are assumed to be confined within the property boundaries, a disclaimer whether the appraiser does not have the expertise concerning the existence of hazardous materials or the impact on value, and other matters that appraisal feel should specifically be highlighted to the person requesting the report. The standard assumptions and limiting conditions for an appraisal assignment, together with a more thorough discussion of this subject, are discussed later. Appraisals will vary the scope of assumptions and limiting conditions based on the circumstances. The appraisal, for example, appraiser is unable to inspect the whole house due to tenancy, water damages seen in the basement. However, the extent and nature of the problem cannot be determined at the effective date of the appraisal. In summary, every client needs to know what the appraiser did and did not do, and is responsible for and not responsible for, and is assuming or not assuming the connection with the valuation of their property. So to recap, there are six important questions. We're defining the problem. What is the identity of the property to be appraised? What are the property rights to be appraised? What is the purpose of the appraisal? What type of value is required? What is the effective date of the appraisal? And are there any assumptions and limiting conditions during the appraisal assessment? So once all of these are taken care of, then we move on to agreeing to complete an appraisal statement or appraisal assignment, which is what comes under the agreement here. So a request for appraisal is generally received either by phone, fax, email, or directly by completing an application form online. When the appraiser is dealing with a regular client and the fees is to be relatively small, the appraiser will complete the assignment based on the relatively informal request and will invoice or bill the client afterwards. Of course, the informal request will still need to be we need to detail the necessary information, define the problems for appraiser to understand what is being asked of him or her, and for him or her to be able to agree to an assignment. For a client that is not very well known to the appraiser and where the fee is relatively small, the appraiser may well ask for the payment upfront before the assignment is started. For large fee assignments, even if the client is well known, an appraiser may have the person requesting the appraisal assignment sign a letter of agreement prepared by the appraiser. In addition, part of the fees may be payable upfront. The content of this letter of agreement should include identification of the property, address and legal description, purpose of appraisal and the type of value required, effective date of appraisal, and date by which the appraisal report must be completed and delivered, the appraisal fees and terms of payment, ability to alter the fee should the property or assignment turn out to be different than that set out by the client during the initial conversation and correspondence. Once the appraisal assignment has been agreed on, the appraiser will want to start on some preliminary work. What is the preliminary work? Before going on to do an inspection of the neighborhood, subject property, and comparables, you would want to do some preliminary work, which includes when subject property was last sold or was listed for sale, the property tax assessment, the zoning, the highest and best use of the subject property, demand and supply, and comparable sales and listing you may use in the value assignment. So MLS is history of the property. By looking back at the subject property in terms of its marketing and sales history, you would get a preliminary guide as to how the property is perceived by the marketplace. This research may take an extra importance, especially when there is a lack of good current comparables of sales listing from which to estimate value. Tax assessment and information. It's always important to look at the taxes of the subject compared to those of the comparables. Lower taxes can be an attractive feature for a property. However, if the subject has taxes that are substantially higher than the other comparables in the neighborhood and there is no reasonable explanation for it, then it's possible that those taxes can be appealed and reduced, resulting in no need for value assessment between subject and the comparables and the tax difference. Zoning and municipal information. So zoning and presence of or the lack of building permit can also impact the value of the property. Therefore, it is important to make some initial inquiries to see if the subject property conforms to zoning or its legal non-conformance. This can be done by reference to zoning maps and by making a call to the local municipal zoning or building department. So let's take a look at the example of a zoning impact. Let's say property A and B are both 50 feet by 125 feet, developed with 1200 square foot bungalows. These two properties are located 3 streets apart in the same neighborhood. Now there is large demand in the area to knock down the bungalows and build 4,000 to 5,000 square feet of two-story homes. Now property A zone is R2 Z 1.0, which allows for building up to 6,250 square feet houses, while property B in zone for R2.5, which allows for building up to 3,125 square feet homes. So clearly, in this case, the demand for 4,000 to 5,000 square foot houses would result in the property A being valuable than property B because of the zoning. And also, there could be a scenario where um, there are two properties, property A and B, which have lots developed with 4,500 square feet. Now these properties are located 2 street apart. Now property A is zoned R2 Z 1.0 and property B is zoned R2 Z 0.5. And the zoning allows for 9,000 square feet house to be built on the property A, but only 4,500 square feet house to be built on zoning B. There is no demand for the area in the area for more than 4,500 square feet houses. Clearly, the difference in zoning here will have a perceivable impact on the value between the two property, as there is no demand to take advantage of the value in take advantage of the differences. Also, the highest and best use. All properties must be all properties must be valued based on their highest and best use. In other words, your estimate of the value is directly related to what a typical buyer with the reasonable knowledge of the market and the property would use or do with the property. It is natural that the amount of money that a buyer would pay is based on the use and enjoyment and he or she would derive for the property. There are two situations that appraiser may come across when appraising a property. Situation one, the property is a vacant site. Situation two, the property is improved site. Now, in situation one, when the property is looking at a vacant site, there are several general factors that he or she would consider in estimating the highest and best use. These general factors include the zoning. Is so again, to determine the highest and best use, there can be two situations. Situation one where the property is a vacant site. Situation two where the property is an improved site. So, in case of a vacant site, there is a notion of a zoning conformance. What is or not allowed to be built on the site. The highest and the best use should conform to the zoning. Physical characteristics is the proposed site physically possible depending on the size and the shape of the site. And economic feasibility, is there a demand for the proposed use and would it be economically feasible? So in case of vacant land, there is this need for zoning conformance, and also need for a physical characteristics and economic feasibility. Now, in case of improved site where there is already some structure or building on that lot, then we need to look at the current use. The current use may be the highest and the best use. If the improvement conforms to the zoning and they conform to the other houses in the neighborhood and they add value to the land. Other uses, if the current use is not the highest use, the best use the appraiser would look at will be an alternate one. So to recap, in this video we talked about what an appraiser needs to understand. So why why client would need appraisal and what will be done with it. So these questions help in uh, in defining the problem. An appraisal decides to undertake an appraisal assignment. There may be an informal or a formal agreement complete with the client. This is dependent on the type of assignment being used. There is a certain amount of research that an appraiser completes before leaving his office to complete an inspection of the subject property. All the properties must be valued based on the highest and best use. The highest and best use of property may, may be estimated in the circumstances where the property is a vacant site, the property is improved site, the property's current improvements are not the highest and the best use, and there is alternative use which would be the highest and best one. Forecasting may be incorporated into the value estimate for sales purposes because properties do not sell on the date their value is estimated. So thanks for your time. Bye.